Hi, thanks for joining us. I'm Sharon Simms with SAS Services, and I am here with two of my amazing colleagues who will introduce themselves. Danny, will you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Danny Goya. I'm with Keala Hoaka and Associates. We do trauma-informed care work throughout the state.
And I'm also here with Tia Hartsock. Go ahead, Tia, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello. Tia Hartsock with the Office of Wellness and Resilience. In the Office of the Governor, we're looking at implementing state system reform support for the departments and building wellness and resilience in Hawaii.
Awesome. So today we're going to just talk story a little bit about trauma-informed care, what it is, why it's important, and what does it mean to be a trauma-informed organization. So you all have been doing this work for a while. We all have been doing this work for a while. And so what does it really mean for you all to be trauma informed?
Well, I think for me, it's to have some of the knowledge and pieces that answers the why, so that when I approach somebody, it's with a lens that is not judging, but trying to understand really what is their second story, what is going on, and to just basically I'm harnessing somebody who connects the three of us and many people who might be watching this, Antipua Burgess, where you be asked, it makes you be curious about somebody, right? And when I'm curious about somebody, I can then have some empathy for them. When I understand them, then I can start to look at maybe there are some elements that are needed, environment, spirit, soul, body, that needs to make this individual feel both safe and connected, so that love and trust can begin. To me, that's sort of the essence of trauma-informed care. It's really the protection of that, the maintenance of that, or the reestablishment of safety and connection through curiosity and empathy.
Definitely agree. I think for me, it's been that notion of how do we move from stop saying what's wrong with people to really like what happened to them, or like and how what happened to them, how did they interpret that, right? And I for me it's always been this thing to check, like even if I'm thinking of a colleague, somebody who works in another department or another organization, and anytime I always hear people saying what's wrong with those people, I always go like, wait, let's step back and let's look at what's happened to them, right? And it's really shifting that paradigm to really change the way we think about how people are showing up and recognizing that they're people don't just pop out that way. That's what I always say. They don't just pop out that way. Something has happened to them, right? And so how do we really better understand and develop empathy for each other? Yeah, Tia, what do you think?
I love that Danny brought up and referenced Antipua. One of the things that she really spoke about a lot was kind of getting to this point of how do we as a system, how do we as our communities as they intersect, and how are each community within themselves building resilience through establishing and creating hope. And really, when we look at trauma-informed care practices, we are and implementing that framework through the principles, we're really thinking about how do we do this without re-traumatizing people? How do
Mhm.
we do this without triggering people? How do we do this with our own awareness of when we get traumatized, we get re-traumatized, our stuff comes up when we get triggered, and when we enter into conversations or relationships or working environments, to not bring that in with us without an awareness of when it happens, and an understanding of what to do when we get triggered ourselves.
Yeah. So, one of the things I realize is we're in such a unique situation here in Hawaii because our governor, was it last year before last, declared our state to be a trauma-informed care state. And we have the privilege of having the Office of Wellness Resilience sitting in our governor's office, which I think is a really unique spot. And I think really what that means is that we're really taking more active steps to kind of move forward to say, what does it mean to be trauma-informed organization? What does it mean to be a trauma-informed state? I mean, this was Danny's vision, putting that stuff out there. And so when we think about being trauma-informed state and a trauma-informed organization, one of the things I really think about is how do we help people to understand that this is a journey, right? Like this isn't like we're not arrived, we're not going to say that we're there, but what does it really mean to actually get us there and to really have organizations being more trauma informed?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when I like when you say that it's a journey, because a journey for the most part can begin with maybe planning out, right, where one wants to go, but along the way there's hiccups, right? There's one of the things that I will say, and I just really wanted to give so much aloha for was, Tia, as the director of the Office of Wellness and Resilience, gets her team together, and the first thing that she and her office has had to address was the Lahaina wildfires, right? Now that wasn't necessarily part of the destination, the plan of the Office of Wellness, but that's what trauma informed does. It informs us about how we provide care for those who are in need, and it provides us a roadmap, but it also almost has a GPS that we can use so that when we do get off track or when we do feel lost, we do have other partners, other people, other folks that we collaborate with that can get us on track, that can take us to and guide us to our hokupa'a or to our North Star. So I do believe that these are really fun, interesting, and yeah, these are the times that trauma-informed care can be used to establish that safety and connection for people and really move towards this final destination of wellness and resilience.
Yeah, and that the reference when we're looking at, implementing trauma-informed care in such intense situations like the Maui wildfires, you're thinking of how, as a government body, specifically speaking from our perspective, is how do we do this in a trauma-informed way? How do we create safety and spaces to allow people to have voice, to give people choices on how they want to recover, to be transparent in the way in which the government operates and communicate continuously, and creating that venue for folks to come together and have the conversation on a regular basis with predictability in a situation that is very unpredictable. And so we didn't know how that was going to go, but it was this concept of how are we staying true to what do we want to make sure we do? We provide safety. What does that look emotionally? What does that look like mentally? What does it look to provide options and communicate what those options are on a regular basis? And how is this all done collaboratively, bringing as many people to the table as possible to be able to say, what are the needs today? What are the needs tomorrow? And how, from our perspective, when we were and continue to work on the recovery efforts, doing it very much so collaboratively with all levels of not only government, but nonprofits, and really redefining. I think in the trauma-informed care field, we kind of redefine who should be at the table. It's voices of those who are typically not at the table, engaging with community, really looking at people with lived expertise, really trying to include those voices that are typically marginalized. I think that is some of the best work that comes out of trauma-informed care work.
Yeah, I think most definitely. I think, what Danny mentioning the work that your office has done, Tia, it really, I think, has been a modeling how we move from just focusing on the people that we serve to the people who are doing the serving. And that means the helpers, right? And I think that that's really what, for so much, I feel like when people were talking about being trauma informed, it was really focused on the people that we serve and not really looking at what about the helper, what about the social worker, what about the early childhood provider, what about the leader, right? Or even the community member, and really thinking about what that impact is for them. And I really feel like this shift that we're in, and, being a state that has made this declaration, it's really about how do we really focus on the workplace wellness? How do we really focus on, I know, Danny, you talk about this often, moving from TIC, trauma-informed care, to trauma-informed organizational change or trauma-informed organizations. In my work, a lot of times I spend time talking about not just focus on self-care, but we need to focus on team care. We need to focus on organizational care, right? And so how do we start to make those shifts and recognize that nowadays there's a lot more tools out there to support organizations to be able to do that work? Yeah.
And it has become painfully obvious through, you know, any community traumatic event that we experience in Hawaii. We more so are getting used to the conversations around mental health, which brings us to really not only acknowledging that mental health is something that we can talk about and we have to talk about, but so is historical trauma, right? So is you know, racial inequalities in our systems. So are inequities that have been in place in systems that are operating, albeit not intentionally, but oftentimes really looking at people that are, you know, struggling more and suffering more than others in our communities. And so, you know, I think it is at the utmost kind of critical point in our communities and in our state that we really think about and consider what that means for not only those that we serve, but how balanced are those who are coming to the table to provide that support, and what we witness, how we respond to situations of violence and natural disasters. We can't unsee those things. We can't unhear those things as responders, as first responders, as social workers, as teachers, as administrators. You cannot unhear that. And what do you do with it? What do you do when it comes up for you as you're trying to help somebody else? And so that, as you open with that help the helpers thing became a huge focal point in you know 2023 and in 2024 around the response to the Maui wildfires.
Yeah, so I mean, for those who, if you're watching this and wondering, well, how does this apply to my organization, my early learning center? Everything that Tia and Sharon just mentioned, that was happening community wide. Think of it as a rip current. That's the energy and force that's going into a classroom. And I'm also talking about the educator assistant, the administrator, everyone. There's this force and energy that is almost uncontrollable that is coming in. That energy needs to be released somehow. And these 0 to 5 children, right, probably the most critical stages of brain development and social and emotional engagement, is all within these things. And the most appropriate way to address this is learning through play. And this is where trauma-informed care strategies braided with, childhood development kind of come together. And it's just probably the most natural way to establish wellness and resilience, to learn about peer support, to learn about empowerment, gender identity. Everything can be done through just learning through play. It's just this establishment based off of trust. If I may share this one story, when I was running Kopa'alana, the homeless preschool, I remember this one mom. We were on the beach. She was homeless. She engaged in all the centers except one, which was the literacy corner. She wouldn't read to her child. So I had suspected that she maybe was unable to read. Well, she trusted me enough when I asked her, hey, I just want to say, you engage in everything. How about, do you want to check out a book? And it was really rooted in this guilt and shame, probably somewhat connected to culture and historical trauma. And she just broke down and cried and said, I don't know how to read. And I said, well, neither does your child. Okay, so take a look at the book, look at all the pictures, and let's come up with a story for each one of the
Beautiful.
pages. And she just, and then she was a storyteller. I mean, your survivor survived. So she was able to just tell the story of the book probably than any gifted reader could have read to their child. And so now this trust was established between myself and the mother. We were now then able to use other partners to get her into a literacy program, and she was able to learn how to read as an adult learner, right? So the energy and the force, again, that's coming into an early learning environment, when it's done and mixed and paired with developmentally appropriate practices and trauma-informed care, grounded really in cultural values and roots, it can be this place where wellness and resilience can really be the hub and center and pico, really, for our communities.
Beautiful, Danny. Just to see how it plays out, and especially in the early childhood spaces, because I think that's really important. And I think it's important when we look at it that we're looking at this is applicable to everyone. You know what I mean? I think, a lot of times people think trauma-informed care is just for those, or trauma-informed organizations are just for mental health organizations or social service organizations or education. But I think it's important that we recognize like it impacts everybody in the community. And I really feel like after the pandemic, we went through this big collective trauma, right? And I think there's a lot of historical trauma that we've all of our families have experienced. And it's how do we help people to know that this isn't this, that if we can implement these principles in multiple settings, then in the long run, our communities and our state are better off, right? And it's not just going to impact those people who are the most vulnerable, but it's impacting everyone in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and the I think the crux of what Danny so beautifully illustrated in that story is it really comes down to how do we better connect? How do we better connect with our place? How do we better connect with our families? How do we better connect with our neighbors and those around us in our communities? And how do we better connect in spaces that are typically very difficult to connect in? It creates this very vulnerable setting that can be that can instantly make us put our guards up. And when that vulnerability kind of comes in a safe way, connection occurs, and that's those are the roads that are then quickly kind of laid out to what healing and building hope looks like. Yeah.
Definitely. Those connections lead to greater empathy, right? And moving to a place where we can have better empathy for our better healing for folks too. Yeah.